The desert wind howled over the canyons as dusk bled into night. The air carried dust and loneliness, companions of every man who rode west of the Rio Grande. Ethan Cole, a weathered cowboy with a Colt on his hip and sorrow in his heart, rode alone. He had lost too much: his brother in a gunfight, his ranch to drought, and his peace somewhere along the frontier. But fate, cruel and strange, wasn't done with him yet. He first saw her near the burned ruins of an old mission, barefoot, frightened, and clutching a small knife. Her face was painted with the dust of the plains, her eyes fierce like a caged hawk. She was Apache, young but hardened by the same wilderness that made men like Ethan old before their time. She didn't speak when he found her, just glared at him through the firelight as if deciding whether he was a savior or another enemy. Ethan dismounted slowly, hands raised to show he meant no harm. "Ain't no reason to fight," he said softly. She didn't lower the knife. Her language came broken, a mix of Spanish and Apache, words he barely understood. But her meaning was clear. She was alone, her tribe gone, her world destroyed by soldiers and settlers. Ethan had seen it before. The frontier took everything: land, families, dreams. That night he built a small fire, gave her half his jerky, and turned his back so she could sleep in peace. But he didn't sleep much. The girl's presence stirred something buried deep within him, a feeling he thought long dead. She was too young to be out here alone. The West didn't forgive weakness. Morning came red as blood. The girl followed him without a word when he packed up his horse. "You got a name?" he asked. She hesitated. "Naelli," she finally whispered. It meant "I love you" in her tongue. Ethan didn't know that yet, but he'd remember the sound of it until his dying breath. Days passed. She rode behind him, silent but alert, her eyes always scanning the horizon. Once, when a rattler lunged near the camp, she killed it with a stone before he could reach for his gun. Another time, when bandits appeared in the distance, she slipped into the rocks and vanished like smoke, reappearing only after danger had passed. She was wild and graceful, a spirit of the desert itself. At a dusty watering hole, an old prospector eyed the pair suspiciously. "You ridin' with an Apache girl?" He spat. "Ain't wise. Folks round here shoot first." Ethan said nothing. He'd seen too much hatred to waste words. That night he caught Naelli staring into the fire, her eyes filled with questions she couldn't ask. When rain came after weeks of dust, they took shelter in a half-collapsed barn. Thunder rolled across the plains and the girl flinched with every strike. Ethan laid his coat over her shoulders. "You're safe," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. She looked up at him, eyes deep as desert wells, and whispered, "If I please you tonight, will you keep me forever?" The words hit him harder than any bullet ever could. He froze, unsure if he'd heard her right. She didn't understand the weight of what she was saying, didn't know how cruel this land could be to a woman alone. "You don't need to please me, Naelli," he said quietly. "You already have." She didn't answer. Instead, she rested her head against his chest, trembling. The storm raged outside, but inside there was only the sound of her breath and his heartbeat. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something close to peace. When dawn came, they rode again, chasing a sun that promised nothing. They stopped in a small frontier town called Red Mesa. Folks there didn't take kindly to Apache blood. The saloon doors fell silent when Ethan walked in with her beside him. "Ain't no place for her," the barkeep muttered. Ethan's hand hovered near his Colt. "She's with me," he said simply. They stayed in a small cabin outside town. Naelli tended a small garden, learned to cook beans over a fire, laughed when the horses tried to steal her food. Ethan found himself smiling again, something he'd forgotten how to do. Yet the world wasn't done testing them. One evening, soldiers came. They said there'd been raids nearby, blamed her kind. Ethan stood between them and the girl. "She's not part of it," he growled. But they didn't listen. The lieutenant sneered. "You protecting her means you're one of them." The next seconds blurred into gunfire and dust. Ethan took a bullet to the shoulder but stayed standing. He shot 2 of them before the rest fled. Naelli tore strips from her dress to stop his bleeding. Tears cut clean lines through the dust on her face. "You fight for me," she whispered. "No one ever fight for me." Ethan grinned weakly. "Reckon I've got a habit of doing foolish things." They hid in the hills for weeks after that. She sang sometimes, soft, haunting melodies of her people. Ethan didn't understand the words, but they eased his pain. He'd sit beside her, watching the firelight dance on her skin, feeling something he hadn't felt since his wife died years ago. Hope. But the frontier had no mercy for lovers. One morning when Ethan went to fetch water, he returned to find soldiers again. Naelli was gone, tracks leading north. They'd taken her. His wound still burned, but rage burned hotter. He rode for 3 days straight through sandstorms and silence until he found the camp. The soldiers never saw him coming. He shot the guards and cut her loose. Her wrists were raw, her eyes hollow, but when she saw him, she smiled. A smile that shattered his heart. "You came," she whispered. "Told you I would," he said. They escaped into the desert, but his wound reopened. Blood stained the sand behind him. "Go," he told her, gasping. "You'll make it farther without me." She shook her head fiercely. "You keep me forever," she said, voice breaking. "I stay." He laughed, weak and warm. "Guess I ain't got a choice, huh?" He touched her cheek, eyes closing as the stars came out one by one. "If there's another world after this," he whispered, "find me there." Naelli stayed by his body until sunrise, then buried him beneath a lone mesquite tree. She marked the grave with his hat and whispered a prayer in her tongue. Then she rode east, carrying his name like a promise in her heart. Years later, travelers spoke of a woman who roamed the borderlands, silent and strong, with a silver locket around her neck and a gun on her hip. Some said she was a ghost. Others said she was looking for the man she loved. But in the desert wind, if you listened close enough, you could almost hear her voice whisper through the canyons.